A lot of exciting things coming out of Sobriety Hub, a lot of exciting things coming up for AzRHA, a lot of exciting things coming up for NARR. It's just good. It's a good year to be a recovery resident operator, guys. We're super pumped, super glad to be here.
So many exciting things.
You gotta love it, guys. Look at that.
Amen.
Right in the heart of downtown Richmond. Sitting here with President of AzRHA as well as owner-operator of Plugged In Recovery, Wade Muhlhauser, and we're going to get his key takeaways from the NARR conference so far. Wade, how are you?
I'm doing good, dude. How are you?
Good, good. Happy to be here. Wade's been to a couple of NARR conferences now. He's the current president of the board, and why don't you just touch on some of your key takeaways so far in this conference?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we've had a lot of fun, met a lot of great other state affiliates. I think a big takeaway from this year's conference is just the representation that group homes, sober livings, assisted livings, and all other aspects of, houses for people with disabilities is coming to heads with their, city and state enterprises. How important things like recovery capital and showing how much, putting $1 into housing can actually save a city and the taxpayer on the back end for what that costs them in services like ambulance ride, treatment, detox, having to go to hospitals and fill up hospitals, things of that nature. So
incarceration.
So just how important it is to get the proper legislation in place, and then the proper levels of what NARR would classify as level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 houses, and doing really education to the state and city levels of just what those services are and what they truly provide the community as a whole, not just the addicts and alcoholics or people with disabilities that we serve.
I think that's huge that you touched on that, the different levels, because at the end of the day, we want to grow our organization, not shrink it, and growing our organization is being more inclusive to all levels of housing that fall under the umbrella of what is considered sober living and what can be licensed with an SLH license. And I think having that education, and we're going to have some continued education here within the next month or so, is going to be a big aspect of that. Now, we have heard from a lot of affiliates across the country that are farther along in their journeys than us and different routes that they were able to use in order to get funding. What has been your key takeaway as far as what we can implement on an AzRHA level for our organization?
I think getting back to recovery capital, getting back to statistics, I think it's going to be very easy for us as an organization to take the collective data we hold. We're small enough and young enough where there is some roadblocks to get over as far as different board formations, diversity, inclusion, things of that nature. But I don't think we're too young to go after some large grants this next year and help really get funding to set up our landscape for the next 3 to 5 years as an organization. One thing that you see as a reoccurring theme along with that is the peer support specialists and what they're doing in homes. I think a lot of other states are recognizing the services that can be done in and around these houses, and so being able to secure funding through the proper channels, going after some big grants, which we've already done a lot of great research to see some that we could go after, but just making it a real point in the next 3 to 6 months to submit for those grants and secure that funding.
And the first step towards submitting for that funding is, one, recognizing with clear definitions each level of care that followed under the umbrella, and then also just figuring out ways for at an organizational level to keep that certification process for every member. Everybody always asks the same question: what is AzRHA doing for me? Why should I be a member? after attending this conference last year, and being the sitting board chairperson over this past year, what would you consider the main value add for being a member to AzRHA?
I would say the certification level is going to be number one. Knowing that there's a national standard that you are following for best practices, and having your house fall into that best practices at a national level, not just a local city or state level. And then secondly is going to be the education. We're going to be able to provide resources when it comes to how do I actually give back and help the people who are in my houses and make sure they have the best experience to set up for long-term success. And then obviously legislation. I think what AzRHA does for you is it keeps you in the know of what legislative things are happening, and with a voice and being part of our organization, you get a seat at that table to be able to actually drive and push change in the local and state communities.
Yep. Well, thanks for sitting down with us. We'll check in with you guys here towards the end of the conference, but it's been super great so far, and we'll see you guys. We're sitting down with Ryan Ross, Vice Chair of AzRHA. We're here again, Richmond, Virginia, NARR Conference 2024. It is midway through day 2, and I just wanted to see what your main takeaways have been since attending the conference.
Yeah, so I think great conference, great city. Definitely bringing a lot of value this year, kind of going back to last year, the importance of data integration into our homes, looking at some other funding prospects, to our operators, but also the clients, right, and the residents in the homes, making sure that accessibility is crucial and key and a priority, I think, are my biggest takeaways this year. And then also making sure that we get aligned as quickly as possible with the state, introducing the NARR levels of care. Recovery residence is being seen as a level of care in the latest ASAM report. If we can get that into legislation, I think that it is going to resolve a lot of our zoning ordinance issues. And then I think, also it comes down to AzRHA as a whole, with the support of NARR, bringing education to the state, right?
Yep.
Because there's a lot of gray, as we all know.
A lot of gray area. There's a lot of stuff that we're trying to either repair or introduce into how we're doing things in Arizona to try to get more on the same level as some other operators across the country. And you touched on it. The big part is the data collection, outcomes tracking is going to be the foundation of all of this, because without proper funding, we're not going to have the ability to go out and even enact any of these things that we'd like to do to just raise the standard in Arizona. So I think that's super important. We already sat down with Clay, who's our software provider for outcomes tracking, and we have some other things that we're going to look to integrate in order to get some more data. Can you just touch again on the importance of our members to get involved in that level and provide that data to the organization so we can aggregate it?
Yeah, well, what's the old saying? What you're not tracking, you can't improve, right? And I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, how do we get the buy-in from the majority of our operators to introduce the systems? Sobriety Hub, RECCAP is going to be another one, which I know some of our operators are using, so that we can aggregate all the data, right, and see where we need to improve. But also, again, like going back to the funding sources, maybe at a local level we can receive some funding and some grants, but when you talk about state funding and federal funding, they're going to need to see the data.
And the funds are out there, and they are available to us as long as we're in a position to properly articulate exactly what we do, improve the outcomes of that. We're able to move forward. And for our members, right, a lot of the time people ask, well, what is AzRHA doing for me?
Yeah.
Why should I be a part of AzRHA instead of just going straight to the state and getting licensed through the state? Can you touch on some of the key points of why it is valuable to an operator to be part of the organization, and what that roadmap looks like over for this next year?
Yeah, I think, going into next legislative session, we're going to be very aggressive in drafting a bill to make sure that DHS and AzRHA is aligned, as well as the local municipalities. But also, I think think the biggest value proposition to AzRHA, and something that we even need to improve on, is the education that we're bringing to our operators. You know, it's been something that we've been lacking on in the past, but that's going to be a priority for me and Wade moving forward, so we can raise the standard.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to.
And raising the standard also comes with implementing new things to the inspection checklist and overall quality experience for residents. And I think a big part of it too is just transparency from the board down as far as those changes in the inspection process and criteria in order to receive a certification, which I think, you know, over this next year we can implement more workshops, more support for new operators, and just more transparency across the board with some of those changes that we're making to the inspection process.
Yeah, totally. And I think the big thing for me is how do we, with funding comes easier accessibility, right? And like that's something that I've heard time and time again the past 2 days. You know, we know that a lot of individuals coming out of treatment, they don't have the resources a lot of the time to enter into, you know, a recovery residence or a sober living home, right? And that's the name of the game. You know, how do we make it accessible and as easy as possible for these individuals to get in here and seek the help in the community they need.
100% correct. Access to those funds on an organizational level is going to help people transitioning from clinical treatment to you know, sober living, because a lot of the time you're not working when you're in treatment for 30, 60, 90 days, and having a hardship scholarship, having a scholarship fund in general to help people within their first 2 to 4 weeks of being in a sober living house on an organizational level is just going to raise the quality of care across the board, and also help just keep beds full and help operators. So yeah, do a lot of exciting stuff coming in. Do you have any other key takeaways that you want to leave members with?
No, I think, again, you know, going back to quality of care, accessibility, and the data. And I can't stress it enough, and I know that it's a lot of work, right? A lot of our operators, you know, maybe it doesn't interest them to implement a lot of these systems, but I think if we can get them to see the value proposition long term, we might not see it tomorrow, we may not see it in 6 months, but it's almost like we're redesigning recovery for a new generation, right? Yeah. What does it look like a year from now, 2 years from now? I see a lot of these states here, a lot of these affiliates, they are so much further in the process as we are, right? Where the state's not mandating licensure, they're the only certifying body, they oversee all the regulatories, everything.
Yeah, right? And even if that's not the case for Arizona and there's still mandated licensure, there's still ways for AzRHA to be a relevant organization 100%. In that certification process. 100%. And I do think that over this next year with the board that we currently have in place, we're going to put a huge emphasis on just the education aspect to operators to just continuously bring to the forefront of everything the value of collecting that data, providing it on an organizational level, putting it in aggregate reports, and having quantifiable outcomes to show cities, the state, Department of Health Services, so that we can have access to the funds to just preserve the organization moving forward.
Yep,
awesome.
I agree. Yeah, thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, what's up, guys? We are here at the NARR conference with Clay, the founder of our exclusive software provider of AzRHA, Sobriety Hub. Many of you have seen him. He's done a lot of workshops and presentations at our monthly meetings. He's also here in Richmond, Virginia, and we are going to sit down with him. We're going to talk about the progress that we've already seen since making the partnership in July and what's to come here in the future. So, Clay?
Nice.
Say what's what's up?
What's up? My name's Clay. As Eric mentioned, I'm with Sobriety Hub. We've got a pretty awesome deal with AzRHA where we made it available to basically all the certified operators for free for a period of time. And our ultimate goal is to collect that outcomes data and help AzRHA get that funding that they deserve.
Exactly, man. That's obviously the end goal, is becoming as grant ready as possible so we can get the funding that we need to lobby with the state for effective policy change and hopefully put together scholarship funds and things of that nature for everybody that's part of AzRHA, and ultimately help the residents, right? Which is the end goal of all of this, right? Is we want to help people in recovery. So we wanted to just touch base with Clay. Since the partnership being announced in July, I think it was, how many AzRHA certified operators have signed up?
Yeah, I think might have been May or June.
It might have been a little earlier, yeah.
And we've got maybe 15 or 20 organizations on the hub, which of course represents, 2 or 3 times as many houses, and then a few hundred beds. I think, I'll have to double check, but probably around 200 AzRHA certified beds actively managed on the hub at this time.
Okay, and of those providers that have signed up for Sobriety Hub, can you touch on, from your experience, what that has been like for them as far as like the upgrades that you guys made in your onboarding process, and what feedback you've received as far as the use of Sobriety Hub?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think overall, as you know, like, we've been adding stuff constantly, and essentially the end product is a product of the customer feedback. And so basically my job is to take the vision of the vision of all of our customers, aggregate it, prioritize it, and add the features ultimately that the customers want. The feedback so far has been really positive, particularly around some new things that we've implemented, basically building forms for people. You know how valuable forms can be, and we used to
And to touch on that, by forms, resident contracts, orientation agreements, all of the documentation that you need to have for the state, that's what he's referring to when it comes to forms.
Yeah, so like basically like you could digitize everything that's compliance related, anything that requires an e-signature that you got to show if you get audited to, what's the AzRHA thing called? The certification body?
Department of Health Services, DHS.
Or the licensing body, DHS.
Yep.
So that's a tremendous value there.
Right.
And then just providing that hands-on support has been a big change that we've made in the last few months, that it's just increased usability. Like, people need a software company that can actually like walk them through how to use it. Even if, and it's pretty simple relatively to what's out there, but you still need that training.
Yeah, you still need that training, and when you have, when you've been running for X amount of years and you've been having paper contracts and your house managers have the paper contract signed, they file it into a filing cabinet, they're logging everything by hand, there's a learning curve that goes with using everything digitally, doing it on your phone or computer. You guys have the onboarding process where you sit down with the entire leadership team, you put them through that training, and then ongoing support after that. Maybe just touch on that. Yeah,
well, I mean, there's a fear, right, of change, and a lot of operators, especially ones that have been doing it for a while, they've done a great job and they've helped tons of people, they've saved a lot of lives. Changing their pen and paper system to something like Sobriety Hub is frightening. And so I think that, for lack of a better term, like providing that hand-holding service up front is just, even if it only takes an hour or two for somebody to understand how to use it, just like that kind of like having a buddy to say like, okay, no, you're not doing it wrong. Okay, if you log a UA and you mess it up, like, it's okay, you could delete it. Like, it's not, none of it's like gonna screw up your outcomes or anything like that. And then in terms of ongoing support, I mean, one thing that we added that, I don't know if you've seen it, but on the app you can like text or email, and then actually that text goes right to me, and I respond right away. But the crazy thing is we don't really get that many texts on there. You know, like it's not nearly as frequent as you'd think.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it just comes down to when you roll out new features, there's always going to take time for people to adopt those new features. But I think the important thing to focus on, specifically when it comes to AzRHA, right, and our organization is the state requires you to keep your resident documents. You've got to keep them for X amount of time after they discharge, and you have to be able to present them within a reasonable amount of time, and that includes a house manager all the way up to anybody in a leadership position. And most of us know when the state comes knocking, you have a 30-minute rule. They give you 30 minutes, you got to be on property, or somebody has to be on property in order to present them with that information. And so the main value here is if you integrate everything into one singular platform that every manager, director, owner, you all have access to, and you can access it quickly through your phone, that's going to help you through all of those Department of Health services when they do stop by for whether it's a grievance or NODs or renewal inspections. Regardless of what it is, they're going to ask for that information, and you can store it all in one place on Sobriety Hub.
So, I mean, if I can comment on that, right, like it seems like there's a lot of different areas of value add, right? There's like the idea that the outcomes data is going to be standardized and that can help get funding for AzRHA.
Right.
There's the idea that keeping your documents in one centralized location is going to help you when DHS comes knocking.
Right.
And then there's other benefits too, right? So like the house manager accountability. Are my house managers logging 2 UAs per resident per week like they're supposed to be doing? How are we doing our shift notes, our check-ins? If we care about mood events or meds, which some organizations do, some don't, how are you ensuring that your house managers are logging what they're supposed to be? That's another value. And then the third that I think is pretty important is just the efficiency that you get from having an application that feeds into a resident in the system, right? Like, as opposed to having multiple formats.
Right. And to kind of touch on what he was saying a little bit, we've thrown it around a couple times, the outcomes tracking. For all of you members that have been regularly attending our meetings, you know within the past 6 months we've made a more concerted effort in order to become grant ready so that we can receive some funding in order to get the organization to where it needs to go. And we've made a lot of headway with our lobbyists and things of that nature to repair that relationship with DHS. But this funding that we're going after, it goes beyond just reform of the policies at the state level. What we're looking to do is provide more education and resources for operators, whether you want to open a sober living or whether you want to just continue pouring into your organization, or setting up scholarship funds or hardship funds for either residents who are coming from situations where they don't have their rent up front, or residents who have been with you for a certain amount of time and they fall on some sort of hardship, right? Those are all things that we can use those funds for, and since we are a 501c3 registered now, we qualify to go after those funds. But in order to do that, we need aggregate data across a good sample size, or a big enough sample size of our entire organization that's showing quantifiable outcomes when it comes to success rates, employment rates, MAT services, things of that nature, and those are all data points that are tracked on the platform.
And I mean, that right there is reason enough to use Sobriety Hub, right? Yeah. But even if you don't want to use it just to be a team player, there's also like, you're going to save time, you're going to increase efficiency, and you're going to increase accountability with your staff.
Right.
So, I mean, obviously I think it's a no-brainer, but there's a lot of good reasons to sign up.
Yeah, and we have a really good relationship with them. As you obviously, we're here with them now. We've been working, Plugged In Recovery's been working with Clay and their team for since last year's NARR conference, and we've had nothing but good things to say about them, and we're really happy that we're able to form this partnership. But we just wanted to put out this video to kind of just check in with you guys, let you know what's going on out here in Virginia, Clay, real quick before we wrap up, do you have anything coming up in the future as far as updates? Maybe touch on some of the new pricing plans for when that trial period runs out, stuff like that members can look forward to?
Yeah, so I mean, people who have signed up already can look forward to being on our legacy pricing plan, which is generally cheaper. So that's a great benefit. In terms of features that are coming, there are a lot of features coming. By way of outcomes reporting, we're looking at basically just building out the outcomes more so that we can do custom reports. So it's a little in the weeds, but like if you've ever used like Power BI or like a tool where you can query a database and say, I want to see age charted against like age and drug of choice charted against length of stay or something like that, where it's going to get more complicated. And the great thing is all that data is already stored. It's just a matter of basically building the pretty reports and creating functionality where you can generate them yourself.
Right, and the reason why we're pushing for everyone to use the one singular platform is the more operators that we have using Sobriety Hub, that data is more easily compiled into those reports, and they're able to help us out on the back end of sending those reports to us rather than having to staff someone from our organization to go through and put all that information together. We appreciate it. Clay, thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Oh, made that awkward. It's okay. All right, guys.
It was
thanks.
such a good video.